The Business in Wales podcast, sponsored by Sinclair Group, the business media for Wales. Hello and welcome back to the Business in Wales podcast with me, Daniel Bevan. Now, as you can see, we're not in our usual studio space today. We are at the Jaguar Land Rover Sinclair showroom in Swansea, which was built in 2023 and is part of the redevelopments we've seen around Swansea in recent years and expect to see many more. So what better way to announce our new podcast partnership with Sinclair Jaguar Land Rover than to talk about just that, the redevelopments around Swansea. I've got 5 fantastic guests who can all talk about the good and the bad, what we like, what we don't like, all around the redevelopments in Swansea. So guys, who wants to introduce themselves first? You can probably do it better than I can.
So I'm Mark Roberts from Sinclair Jaguar Land Rover here in Swansea, and been pleased to represent the group today. My role is predominantly a local business development manager, which means my focus is with our local corporate clients.
Gus Williams. I wear a couple of hats, one of which is CEO of Bevan Buckland. Bevan Buckland are Wales' largest independent accounting group, and we are very proudly headquartered here in Swansea, just down the road, in fact. But I'm also CEO of the South Wales Chambers of Commerce, and personally am sort of dedicate a lot of my time to supporting businesses across the region, helping them to develop their businesses, helping the region to grow, and advocating for economic development across South Wales.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Davis, and I own a company called Blitzer Group based here in Swansea. We're a commercial cleaning and maintenance company. So predominantly we do large footprints all over the UK, but proud to be based here in Swansea.
I'm Peter Loosemore, Director of St Mary Square Developments. We have circa 125 apartments in the city centre, and in addition to that, we have around 250,000 square feet of commercial space, all based in the city centre, so I'm quite heavily invested in that area. We maintain, we manage, and when I say we, it's myself and my wife. We retain all our properties and rent them out, so we continue to be heavily invested in the city centre.
Hi everyone, I'm Molly Dowrick. I'm Head of Marketing at the Morgan's Collection in Swansea. We are a hotel and accommodation provider in Swansea. We have the Morgan's Hotel, which is Swansea's #1 hotel, a 4-star boutique hotel registered with Visit Wales, the Morgan's Townhouse, 4-star accommodation, and the George in Swansea, which is a 5-star boutique guest accommodation. We employ around 60 employees, and we are very proudly a Welsh firm and proudly independent, based here in Swansea in the marina area of the city.
Wonderful. Well, welcome all. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with what we like and the splitting the conversation into 3 mainly: what's been completed, what's in development, and what's planned. So based on what we've seen and what's been going on, Mark, I imagine at the top of your list is going to be the very building that we're in right now. But is there any other highlights for you?
Yes, I mean, certainly I'm very proud to call this my work environment. It's an amazing space and very different to a lot of spaces I've worked in the past. It's very light and airy and locally developed with local business partners that have meant that the production and the construction and everything has all been sort of locally sourced. But I live in Mumbles. I also see on my commute the Swansea Arena development and the area outside the Green Room and the outside spaces, and more recently the promenade down in Mumbles where the seawall's been redeveloped. That's been a positive outcome, as I see, as part of my sort of daily routine. But also, I guess, as you see the spaces that still haven't had that development, as you pass through certain areas of the town and the city, and it'd be good for everywhere to catch up and get more of an even keel across the city centre, really.
Is there any other highlights for anyone else?
I mean, I think, we've certainly seen in the last 5 years notable transformation in the city centre and notable improvements. And I think a lot of that's down to sort of Rob Stewart came in on the council, and I think really sort of did try to get things done and drive things forward. And we've seen some sort of small scale developments, and the street scene has greatly improved. So I think everyone I speak to, believes in Swansea, believes that Swansea should be one of the best places to live and to work and to do business, not just in Wales but in the UK. And there are a lot of successful small businesses here in Wales. We're very much in Swansea, I should say. It's very much an SME economy here in Swansea, and we've got a lot of fantastic businesses. And some of those businesses are investing, like Sinclair, which is good to see. Bevan Buckland ourselves, we've grown hugely in Swansea in the last few years. So I think that there are genuine positive feelings towards what can be achieved here in Swansea. There are certain limitations which we need to think about overcoming. How do we attract more commercial investment? How do we get that investment out of the city centre? Transport and infrastructure and commercial premises are always going to be a bit of an issue here. But I think what we've seen so far, hopefully, are some of the sort of foundation stones to sort of larger redevelopment across Swansea.
Swansea is an amazing city. We have so much to be proud of. We're by the sea, we have beautiful beaches, we have friendly people, lots of independent businesses, as you said. It just largely feels at the moment as a bit of a work in progress, that things are announced. And obviously, as we all know, buildings take so much longer to build and develop than we want. Announcements are made really early on. Everyone gets really excited hearing about what's going to go into Debenhams in the Quadrant or what's going to take on an empty unit. And I think local people in general don't necessarily always think it's going to take 2 or 3 years to fill that. I think it's a very exciting time to be in Swansea, but I think we've really got to have a long-term view of what's going to come in the future. And I think, having that long-term mindset is what's going to drive us forward, because things don't just happen overnight.
So how have we seen our businesses, Molly and Peter, probably best to talk to you about these things? Molly, from your perspective as working in the hospitality and hotel sector, things like the arena we've already talked about, how much of a difference has that made to the bottom line in Morgan's?
The arena was great. We are proud to be a partner with the arena. I think there's only 3 hotels that have partnered with the arena. We're proud to be one of them. We get a lot of guests from outside of Wales coming because they're going to see a show in the arena. We do some ticket packages, which helps us. We also see people coming to Swansea because they're going to an exhibition, they're going to the Grand Theatre. We get a lot of guests, maybe they're going to the football or the rugby. So I think it's definitely not the only thing people come to Swansea for, but it definitely was. It brought a lot of people to the city, particularly in the autumn. The autumn is when the arena tell me that's when they have a lot of their big names, a lot of their comedians and performers. Typically in the summer, we are having international guests that are travelling to Swansea, maybe as part of a Wales-wide visit. We had some guests recently from the Mormon Society of Utah who are travelling around Wales on a religious trip, and Swansea was part of that. So sometimes you get some more quirky or unusual visits, but typically, arena, Grand Theatre, Swansea exhibitions, things like that tend to be in the autumn, and in the summer more of an international demographic.
And Peter, from your perspective, are you seeing a bigger take-up in people wanting to live and obviously not have to commute from outside into Swansea to work?
Well, yeah, we as I said earlier, we've got around 125 apartments in the city centre. Those vary in size from studios to 1, 2, and even 3-bed apartments, and we've got those in the city. I think what we're always surprised in Swansea is that we all take the view of, who wants to live in that? Why would somebody want to live in that? The people who are living in our accommodation, in the main, are people who are moving here to work. We are, I would say, on our residential portfolio, around about 95 to 100% occupied. When we get an apartment that comes empty, we don't have any trouble filling it. Commercially wise, with the exception of we've just acquired the former David Evans buildings in town, which obviously, that was 20 years ago that David Evans was there. So it's technically called Castle Keys. It's a building where Zara used to occupy. We've got some great tenants in there like Slater's, the gym, Coffee Number 1. I don't want to miss anybody else. That was Zinco. And we're at Tiger. That is everybody. So we're in a position now where there's a number of those units. Unfortunately, Zara vacated. We were in a position of transition where we were trying to acquire it while Zara vacating. And you've got space there where you're looking at it going, for the city, we would look at that and go, well, Zara aren't committed to the city. They were committed to the city. It's just a European, because obviously Zara are a Spanish firm. It was a European decision. They wanted a different format and a different size of store. So it's not just Swansea they vacated. There was a number of one. Their lease finished on the 8th of December and they moved out on the 6th. It's very much a national view. We're in a fortunate position where we've got one unit under offer and we've got another good viewing going on this week with a national tenant. It'll be in a different format. It's a 17,000 square feet unit there over 2 floors. Well, retailers don't want that. We've moved our model to a number of buildings. We bought the old Next in town. We bought the corner unit on Oxford Street, which I can't even remember who was in there because it was that long ago that it was occupied. We are in a position where we can strip out the commercial unit on the ground floor. We can then use the upper floors to convert those to residential. So our last building that we're just finishing at the moment is the corner of 263 to 266 Oxford Street. So for Swansea people, they'll know that as the former Next and the corner cut. Then we've got the Principality who've just moved in. And we've got Shoe Zone, which we were able to do a deal with. And then we've got 22 apartments upstairs. Those, we've been waiting on some services, but we know we'll let those 22 apartments within, if I put them on the market now, they'd be full by December. So there's a really strong demand for the city centre. And I think partly that is because, one, we provide private accommodation. We're able to do it at sensible rental levels. We're able to use the commercial on the ground floor by not giving a commercial occupier the whole building, because people these days don't want the whole building because they don't hold stock on site. It's easy. We can get something delivered overnight. If you're, I bought something from North Face the other week. It was there in the morning. I bought it the day before. So I think commercially wise, we're different now to a format of that. Going back to the positivity of the city centre, I think people are picking up on that. I think people are picking up on the arena. I think the arena was fantastic. I think 7071 the Kingsway, we've got tenants that are moving into our residential accommodation who are working in those units. The university, the second campus, obviously, is something which has come up. Personally, I don't think it's in the right location, but it's there. And I think the demand is great to see that from the university. They want it. I think you've got a number of schemes that are going on. As Mark mentioned, the one to do the sea defences, I think that is fantastic. I think it's the best I've ever seen Mumbles looking. And I think what we need to understand is we don't want to be seen as Swansea and Mumbles. It is the heart, is part of the city. And I think that is the biggest thing which often gets overlooked, is that people think, the people are spending money in Mumbles. In fairness to the council, they're spending money everywhere. And again, I don't want to keep going on because I'm sure everybody else wants to come in.
So you just invested in apartments in the city centre. What's the demographic coming in that's sort of driving demand for those that you see? Is it?
It's very hard to say. We did a development on the Kingsway, which it's on the Kingsway, but it's corner of Princess Way and College Street. So it's hard to say who's in there. The Storyteller Bar are in there now. Cake Box, our restaurant. So we did that corner. And when we were in planning, we were doing 1, 2, and 3 bedders. And people are like, well, who wants a 3-bedder? And the problem is that we don't know, really. We don't know when we're doing it from the outset. We're just trying to make sure that we, as a portfolio of 100 and odd properties, we need to have a cross-sector of that to accommodate people. So, yeah, I've got in the two bedders that we've got there, I've got families living there. I've got in the 2 beds you might get a single person, but they want another bedroom. I think what people don't realise is that there is a demand for that, and there is a want to have nicer accommodation. We provide quite large units, or very large units, really, in some respects. So I think it's very hard to put your finger on one sector. We have a block of 22 student apartments. They're all studio apartments, so they all have their own space. And I'll get a varied range of people in there. I've got students that are local students. Primarily, they're the second years. So we don't tend to get first-year students. First-year students will tend to stay on campus. And then once they get to know the city, they'll move into the city. So we've got students there from from Greece, from India, from Kenya, from Spain, it's such a wide sector. It's very hard to put your finger on it. But I think what we do find, because we're very hands-on with our tenants, in fact, my wife is sometimes far too hands-on, she answers the call every time that she gets a call, is that the people love the city when they get to it. They love the city centre, and I think it's almost as Swansea people. We look at it going...
I think it and again, we don't need to do anything new here, but if you look at other cities around the UK where there's been significant economic development, a huge part of that has been people moving back in to live in the city centre. And we do, and there's some so I voted my feet on this one, and when I sort of post-COVID, when everyone's back to the office and back to meetings and things, I actually made a conscious effort and moved into the middle of Swansea because I thought, right, well, there's regeneration happening here. We've just spent 2 years stuck at home not doing anything. I thought it'd be nice to be amongst people again. But I see, again, it's not rocket science. I think attracting people to live back in the city centre is a key part. It's not just about attracting businesses in, but basically you need the people living there, eating there, shopping there, doing all those sorts of things. And every other city that's seen that regeneration, a big part has been people moving back into the city centre. And there are, and part of the problem that has happened in Wales is after people migrated out of the city centres, it drove out the commercial landlords and the commercial property owners from the city centre, and you got a sort of a complete hollowing out. So I think it's important that there is a mix of not just social housing, but commercial, commercial and private housing and rentals within the city centre, because we need mixed communities. The worst thing that can happen is when you've got segregated communities, the wealthy living down in Mumbles and the not so wealthy, living in another part of Swansea.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as I said, that viewpoint, it's not difficult. I remember doing GCSE geography, and that was on that. That was, you want people living and working in the city centre, and I think we are seeing that. I think that, as you quite rightly point out, there is a number of developments going on. There's quite a lot of investment from Pobl, from Caredig, providing the social housing, which is much needed. But then you get the private sector side of things, which also feeds into that. I think, looking in Swansea, there's a number of schemes where you probably ideally wouldn't have happened. The Enterprise Park ideally wouldn't have happened. The out-of-town retail parks, they wouldn't have happened. And then obviously everything would have been funneled into the city centre. But it's changed now, and that's what we've got. So we have to make the best of what we've got.
And Peter, if I can bring you into the conversation, because if you've got added footfall into the city centre, that's sort of where your company comes in, the Blitzer Group. Tell us a bit about what you do and the challenges, I guess, that you're facing now that there's more people on Wine Street.
Yeah, there certainly is. I think it's just having a decent plan that can revolve around numbers, and just making sure you maintain it to that standard that you're expecting. I remember Wine Street when I was 17, and we used to go put money in the bank down there, and it was very quiet. I remember it very well, and it's now a bar. But the dynamic of Wine Street has changed considerably over the last 20, 30 years. I actually think it's a good thing, even though I don't go there myself very often. But I like the idea of having all of the bars in one place, where I suppose when you're trying to look after the place, it's a lot easier to look after. I remember the days of us, having nightclubs and bars all over Swansea, and bit tougher to sort of keep tabs on, I suppose. But from our point of view, it's just being able to put our assets that we have in the right place at the right time and keep it up to scratch, really.
I was a Swansea student. I moved to Swansea 11 years ago yesterday. It came up on my time up this morning.
Happy anniversary.
Thanks. I know, how crazy is that? And I agree with you. I think the fact that Wine Street has become a bit of a bar district, at least as a young woman, feels very safe. It feels really safe to have all those bars and restaurants in one go. If you lost a friend, you'd find someone in the next bar. I think Swansea Bid have done loads with the Wine Street and going up to the castle area of the city with the city rangers. The security measures, particularly for people that are drinking alcohol, particularly for young students, that kind of thing. With our hotel guests, we do get a mixed response. Some love the restaurants, some want to go out partying. Others want to avoid that. So we recommend a lot of places in the Marina district. We've partnered with a few restaurants in that area. But I think, keeping Wine Street clean and pretty, I can imagine, is a massive challenge for you. I think having that bar district as a local young resident is in my interest, as a former student is in my interest. But I think some of our guests can be put off with the idea of having to walk from the hotel through Wine Street into town, past all the what can be rowdy bars on a Saturday night or a Wednesday night. Very much a mixed response. Interesting what you were saying about how a lot of your students in the block are internationals. We get a lot of international guests at Morgan's, and we have fantastic feedback about the city. It's interesting because I think sometimes we drive past some scaffolding or a building site, and actually the visitors don't notice that. They sing our praises. They talk about how nice it is to have a market full of independent Welsh stalls, how close we are to Mumbles. I think a lot of guests see Mumbles as a different town rather than part of the city. I think that's a really interesting point that you made. But we get such feedback because people are really excited. But then I also think maybe if they're saying 3 or 4 days, they feel like they've done Swansea, whereas for those of us that live here all year round, the best visits, you've done those best places all in one, and then you need to have enough to go around the full year.
I wonder what everyone's thoughts are then about whether there's too much focus on the city centre in that respect. Because if the goal is to see Mumbles and the city as one, then if there's lots of development going on in the city centre, then maybe they do feel a bit more disconnected.
Can I go again?
Of course. Yeah.
I feel like we have a lot of out-of-city high streets. Gowerton's its own community. Morriston, they have fantastic Victorian Christmas lights picture, and the whole community comes out. People from across the city will go to Morriston for this week at Christmas. Uplands and Bryn Mill have become a bit of a student high street with independent board game cafes, independent bars. So I think you're right. I think most focus is obviously on the city centre, but I do think we do have a lot of out-of-city high streets with successful independent businesses.
I mean, to some extent, that's driven by the constraints of the bid framework under which the sort of city centre development is taking place. So they're constrained by the rules under which they operate, which means it is focused on the city centre. I do think we're missing a sort of a grander vision for Swansea, and I think someone mentioned earlier when we were chatting before this, we should stop trying to compare ourselves with Cardiff, whoever. And I do think the beauty of Swansea is that it does have its own identity, that we're not Cardiff, but I think perhaps there does need to be a sort of slightly more ambitious vision for the wider regeneration of Swansea. I've banged the drum quite a few times that we should be looking to build many, many more homes in Swansea. We're a little bit constrained by the land, but at the same time, there are large swathes of brownfield sites here which are ripe for redevelopment. But again, one of the things that constrains those is these constantly changing slight rules around sort of planning development and what you can do, particularly on low-lying sea level areas and some things like that. So I think I think while we'd like to see development go outside of the city centre, I think the constraints of the way the bid operates, it's understandable what they're trying to do. But I think all of us really would like to see that bigger vision for what Swansea can be in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And as part of that, I think we should be building 10, 20,000 houses a year, and really building new commercial premises outside of the city centre. Interesting you said about the enterprise park and the retail park shouldn't have happened. I think it's almost town planning in the 60s, 70s, and even onto the 80s was terrible. And so it's given this notion of town planning an extremely bad name. But the risk we have now is that, okay, well, we shouldn't plan anything. And I think we do need to see some, now that we've learned the lessons of the mistakes of the planning of the 60s and 70s, I do think we shouldn't be scared of having a sort of a grand design for Swansea and a bigger plan, because hopefully, although town planning has a dirty name because of the mistakes of the 60s and 70s, hopefully we've learned from those and we knew better, so that we do it this time, we can have a better stab out of it. But I think there's still a fear of just the word of town planning, so that development tends to be a bit better, and we're still not joining up the whole city in terms of what a great grander development plan would look like?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of that. I think the problem is, I guess back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you were able to sort of take a view of where people wanted to live, where businesses wanted to trade from. The problem that we do have now is obviously the internet, is that nobody really needs to go to a shop. That is where we are at. So as much as we can put a view in, we think this retailer will go here, or we think, Debenhams, for argument's sake, you look at Debenhams now with that concept would never be started again. You have got Mike Ashley, keep pushing it, and in fairness to him, but he's a one-off. The internet is such that I'm a massive advocate of the city centre. I think the city centre was great. I'm in the city centre every day. But I'm also that guy who's on Amazon or who's on, as I mentioned, North Face. You can get a jacket from North Face. I could order it today, be here tomorrow. And then if I didn't like it, I could send it straight back. And they'll credit me straight away. So I think that's the problem with it. I think as far as the development's concerned, residential, absolutely. I think that is something which we know and we can factor in, because we know people will always want somewhere to live. I think the outer centres, the smaller centres, I think they have benefited a lot from COVID, because obviously there's a lot more people now working from home. So the likes of Gowerton, I went to school in Gowerton, that retail area there, just to name one of them, would have been struggling before COVID. Now I think that you can see that it's quite often I actually see that things are opening there now rather than closing, and I think people working from home a lot more, but that's detrimental to the city centre. I think on another point, as far as the city centre is concerned, I think we look at it with two views, really. We look at how do people from out of Swansea see Swansea, and then how do people inside Swansea see Swansea. I think the focus from people living in Swansea is they really want a city centre. I think they want things to go to. That the market is fantastic, and I think the footfall in the city centre is certainly up. I think the problem is when you get into the city centre, there's not enough to keep you there. I think, as I said, the market is great. We could do with some more retailers, but then we come back to the same problem: is the internet.
Did you want to go in on this?
Yeah, and I was just going to sort of one of the things I see since I've lived in Wales, which is sort of coming up for 6 years now, is I hear a lot of stories of people saying like they grew up in Swansea, then they got a job, then they moved away, and then they come back to raise a family, and it's got a lot of. I think there's also that mixture of. There's a lot of very good natural local resource. So you've got things like Klein Gardens and the beach and places that people would pay to travel to visit on your doorstep that you don't really need. You don't really go to. But equally for families, and if you're trying to encourage people into the city centres, there's not a lot for young kids to do in the city centre if they're accompanied by parents, families, whatever. And I think it's also trying to get that balance between having the status developments, which I know we've already highlighted, things like the areas around the Green Room and the very obvious spaces, but equally you go through uplands and you've got Cundonkin Park, and it's so well hidden that even people who live in Swansea don't really know what's there. And my son plays a lot of sort of youth football, and you go to a lot of the spaces that are allocated for that by various council or whatever, and they're under a lot of stress in terms of the upkeep of them. They're not particularly well managed. They're not particularly nice to go to compared to some facilities that you see in other towns and cities. I think I know we touched on it earlier, it's that greater sort of what would be your ideal city, and I think it's always difficult to try and encourage the investment in things that don't have a return on investment, but actually make the enjoyment of living somewhere good. I mean, we see it even in our business, like the people don't need the stress of life, and if you can make business stress-free for people, and if the person who wants to set up an independent coffee shop in town can do it stress-free, and somebody who wants to live so they can work somewhere in town stress-free, it's all those decisions and making sure that you can accommodate. But it's such a wide amount of things. There's no magic wand to kind of give it all done overnight. But I think it's dangerous to sort of compartmentalise different sectors and think, well, let's do that. I think it's having a more joined up ethos, even though you might not be able to do it all in one go. It's trying to get a blueprint that works for a good number of people.
Peter, have you got the microphone? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting, some of the conversations around the table, actually, because I moved back to Wales 9 years ago after leaving 30 years ago. So I've seen it through both lenses, I suppose. And I think after COVID, we saw a lot of people returning to, the seafront, the beaches and the parks and everything else, and it was quite a positive thing to see. I actually think as well, what I've seen myself coming back 9 years ago, what's happened down in Mumbles, I think it's a positive thing. Even though it is the wider Swansea, I actually like the individual areas. So I quite like going to Mumbles with my family and take my dog for a walk, as much as I'd like, my first job was in Debenhams in Swansea. So I've seen it from, a few different versions of it. I think it's interesting what you said earlier about when you're not from Swansea and you come here as a student or you come here to work, you do see it through a different narrative. I think sometimes it's too easy to look at it through a negative lens, and I think there's a lot can be done in Swansea city centre. And I'll pick up on what Peter said earlier. I think what good looks like in the next 20 years is not what it looked like 100 years ago. Where we would have all gone to the city centre to shop. Them days are over. And if you look around Europe, a lot of people do live, work and enjoy city centres in a different way to maybe what we're used to. So I think we just need to be a little bit open-minded. But I think having a vision looking 30, 40 years ahead would definitely be a plus.
So let's have some final thoughts then. One go from everyone in the room. If we were to draw up that vision, what's the one thing that has to be in that vision for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years of Swansea, city centre or not? Who wants to go first?
Good luck with that one, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll throw the big one out there. We're seeing a couple of very real trends demographically. We're once, after we saw a decline in urbanisation in the 2000s, we saw people moving out of, more people moving to sort of semi-rural areas and suburbs and things like that. We're seeing mass urbanisation again now. People want to live in city centres. People want to live in big urban areas. I mean, London's population actually declined for a lot of the last 50 years, but now has gone up 2 or 3 million in the last 20 years. So I think Swansea has to be conscious of that, and it's important that we have places like Swansea as urban areas that keep people within Wales, because the risk is otherwise urbanisation is just going to drive people across the bridge. So my big vision, I'd love to see a Swansea that is double the size by 2050 and is perhaps part of a wider conurbation with people who moan about this, but with Neath and Port Talbot, and you've got a decent transport infrastructure, public transport infrastructure, linking the various areas around this part of South Wales that is attracting business and people to live, because we've got so many, I think, underutilised assets such as the beach. We've got amazing green spaces in Swansea. We've got the whole river. I mean, I walk my dog around Swansea all the time, and it amazes me. You go to places, you're in the middle of a city centre and you don't bump into anyone. You do some of the paths along the river and some of the parks. So we've got huge natural assets here that can attract people. I think we need to have a more ambitious plan to grow the city so that it reaches that critical mass, which will really transform the economy of the region.
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think we need things now that are going to stop people from moving away from Wales. They've come to Swansea, they've fallen in love with the city, whether that's for work, for students, as a student, for your family. We want people to have things now, whether that's retail or leisure, districts to keep them, but we also have to have our eye on that future, the 30 years time, and that long-term thought. So I think it's both at once. I know that's pretty much impossible, isn't it, to have all that investment and all those exciting things to keep people interested now, but also definitely the eye to the long term and what it's going to be like for my children, my grandchildren, and going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of second what everyone said, but also on Gus's point, I think that the Bay as a region would sit nicely as a long-term project, both in terms of the environmental elements that people keep talking about that never seem to get any further, to as a destination, when you come off the M4, the first bit when you start to see just before junction 42, that first view you get, there's a lot of scope for that to be more for people to access from the start, and there's a lot of wildlife that's already embedded into sort of protected areas, and I think there's a way of sort of developing all that to give benefits to the region, both in terms of economic and also social elements that would make it a nice place to visit, stay, work, and grow.
I think as far as looking at in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I've no idea. Because I genuinely, I think
Give us the best guess. Go on.
I'd love to see the population double. I think that would be fantastic, because I think there would be a lot of benefit to that. I think where we are at the moment is we are in an excited time at the moment in Swansea. And I see that from being within a lot of developments that are happening in the city. I think we're in a very unique position now where we haven't been for a long time. And that position is that we've got a lot of private development happening in the city centre, which is led by Swansea people. We've got ourselves doing schemes. You've got Morgans and Swansea.com doing schemes. You've got the guys behind Morganstone and Cartay. You've got the Biophilic building, which is a landmark building. We've got Carwyn and the team there. In addition to that, you've got a very proactive council in some respects. You've got Rob Stewart, who we mentioned earlier on, and his team there moving that forward. And we've got universities. We've got 2 or 3 of the best universities. And I don't think we necessarily see what's going on behind the scenes there, because, I know the links that they've got with Rolls-Royce and that sort of things. And there's a lot of pull that comes into the city. So I think we are in a really exciting place. And I think I've looked at CGI schemes that have been proposed for Swansea for the last 20-odd years, and they haven't happened. And I think now they are, and I think that will push us forward over and above a lot of other cities, really. And I don't make reference to Cardiff in that, because Cardiff is fantastic. And it is, we should be very proud of our capital city, because it is a fantastic city. And that's coming from a Swansea guy who's a Swansea City supporter as well. But that is a fantastic city. I think there's a lot of positives, is my take on it at the moment, really.
Of course, Cardiff are now copying us by building an arena.
Oh.
No comment.
Much bigger. And Peter, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think what I've been reminded of here today is, it's quite easy to have a good moan and, be quite negative. And so thank you for reminding me. But actually, no, joking aside, there's no doubt the last 5 years in particular have been very, very very positive. I think sometimes the general public need to remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time. But I have seen some good developments in the city centre over the last few years, even though they take a while to come to bear. When they are at the end, they do reap their fruits. So I think that's a really good thing. I think also we need to remind ourselves, my children, what they want the city centre to look like in the future is going to be different from what myself wants. But I think we've got to be positive, we've got to be upbeat, and we've got to concentrate on getting it done. So we all have our part to play in that, I think.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much all for your time. We only mentioned the C word, Cardiff, a couple of times, but it's been a lovely conversation. Peter, Molly, Gus, Mark, thank you so much for joining us on the Business in Wales podcast. And thank you again to Sinclair Jaguar Land Rover for their fantastic showroom and hospitality. We're really looking forward to working with them, 2 iconic brands working together on this partnership for the Business in Wales podcast. So until next time, take care. The Business in Wales podcast, sponsored by Sinclair Group, the business media for Wales.